I'm Rachel Hymas, and I'm talking on behalf of BDG Architecture and Design for London Society. And what I really love about the London Society is that it's bringing together a group of people from all different demographics across London and also other areas as well. And I really believe that this conversation is incredibly relevant right now. And I really think that each one of the guests that I'm speaking with this evening have got something really interesting to say, and actually quite different. So we're going to sort of structure the conversation where I'll introduce each of the guests. We'll talk a little bit about what they do and their experiences within a workplace, and actually also within their careers as well. So it's going to be a bit of a hybrid conversation. But I think possibly we will begin with, yeah, I think we'll begin. Got a question in here actually. Yeah, well, what I'll do is I'll begin now by just introducing each one of my guests. Obviously, I'm Rachel. I've already introduced myself, and we're doing this on behalf of London Society, and I'm doing this on behalf of BDG Architecture and Design. So firstly, I have Amber, of which I'd love you just to say a little bit about yourself, what you studied, and a little bit about who you are, really. That would be nice.
Yep, so my name is Amber. I am a third-year student at Bournemouth University, currently doing my internship at Infomare PR and Communications. We specialise in all things construction and property, as well as a little bit of products as well. And I have experience in the bridal industry and the sport and leisure industry as well.
Very nice. And then I'm moving on also to Bobbie as well. And it's quite interesting. What I love here is that each one of the guests actually does something really quite different. And it's quite dynamic to have a group of people who are from different parts of the creative industries, but also ones that kind of all come and encompass the same sort of entity, I guess. So Bobbie, it'd be lovely just to hear a bit more about yourself and what you're studying and your passion, really.
Hi there, I'm Bobbie, as you guys know. I'm a recent graduate from Central St Martin's. I studied a course of graphic communication design, where I currently specialise in brand strategy, information design and illustration.
Very nice.
So, yeah.
Nice. And then last but not least, we've got Freya.
Yeah, hi, I'm Freya. I work at BW. We're a fit out contractor, and we specialise in office space, so that's very useful for today. I work in the business development team, so I help bring in new business, go out meeting clients, consultants, and a bit of cold calling too, which is always fun. I've been working here about 2 years. I graduated 2 years ago, but I am still a Gen Z, just about.
On the peripheral edges.
Yeah. And I studied chemistry, which has nothing to do with what I do now, but it was very fun.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that I think will be a really fascinating part of the conversation. I mean, what I'm going to do is I'll come to each of the guests individually, and then we'll kind of really have it as a bit of a conversation between us all, because I think that everyone here has got something relevant to say about the different questions that I have surrounding workplace design and the sort of flexibility aspect of it. But I think how I wanted to begin was by initially speaking with Amber, and also just kind of talking about the fact that you're obviously working for Infomare PR at the moment, and I would love to kind of know whether or not PR, I mean, to be honest, this is an open question to everyone really, but if PR was actually what you wanted to go into originally. And I think that one of the main things that I would love to know about, particularly with Generation Z, is that you're in a world of digital communication. You see so many people throughout the world doing so many exciting different things, because everyone always puts their best life on the internet. And I'd love to know whether or not it's almost lived up to what you imagined it would be as a career to kind of start with as well. And then obviously talking about the workplace after that.
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of different options for anyone going into any education or job sector at all. I myself changed degrees 3 times before it even began. So I currently do marketing and public relations. And I think, like you were saying, with it being a case where there's access to so much online, with everyone at the moment in my year doing their placements, you can't help but look at them and think, what are they getting up to, how can I get involved in something like that, and things like that. And that carries forward into your personal life as well. Like, we're just going to constantly compare our experiences to other people's, but it can also be a really good thing, because then it can introduce us to new things that we didn't know that we could enjoy. I'm using marketing with PR because a friend of mine who's a couple years older than me, she's working as a marketing exec in another role, and she introduced it to me because originally I wanted to be a film student, and film and marketing are quite different. And I think the options are really nice, and I think it's quite nice that we can dabble in loads of different aspects and different job roles. I came straight from working in bridal to working in a PR firm where we specialise in furniture and offices and construction, and they're completely different things, but there are still things that I had in bridal that I can pick up now. So I think it has its pros and cons, but I think if you don't let the comparisons and the self-doubt get you down, then if anything, it's just going to open you up to loads more possibilities.
Do you think that that sort of flexibility and fluid sort of side of your career almost made you work in a certain way within a workplace as well? Do you think that, for example, the idea that you've kind of gone into PR now, that in terms of like your workplace and the way in which you work is sort of reflective of that, and the fact that you've had lots of options and been quite aware of the amount of options that have been available to you?
I think it has, for sure, because I also am dyslexic, and that changes the way I work, and that changes how I read things and see things. And I think if anything, it just teaches you how to adapt easier and how to be self-motivated in adapting, because then when you're in the workplace, you kind of have to be the person to be like, this isn't working for me, how am I going to make it work for me? And so with things like my dyslexia at university, like you're very alone in terms of your lecturers aren't going to tell you to do things, so you have to do it yourself and learn how to do it yourself. And I think I'm quite lucky with working in such a small office space that it's not a case of you becoming like a number or someone that doesn't see the higher ups. We're constantly around each other, so then constantly learning from each other as well.
I'd love to know a little bit more, actually. To be honest, I didn't know about the dyslexia side, and I would love to, if you don't mind, because obviously there's a lot of research and a lot more knowledge these days within sort of the mental health, and also with things like dyslexia and actually the way, I mean, to be honest, introverted, extroverted, everyone is different. And do you think that actually the knowledge and the awareness of those aspects of everyone being quite different, do you think that that has almost helped you to a certain extent, in that people are much more aware? And for example, like workplaces, there's sort of quieter areas where you can focus, or, you know, those types of things are set up. Do you find that in terms of your work that actually that has really helped you, particularly from like the dyslexia side, but even if it's not so much that side as well?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I have a laptop that has loads of software on it that helps me be on, if you want, a level playing field with everyone else. And so I can like record my meetings, and at university I can record my lectures, and that helps me because it matches the sound bars up to the people speaking, and so then I can refer back. But I think I've again been quite lucky in that it's quite common practice for after a meeting at least one person to send a mass email of, here's a summary of everything we talked about, because sometimes it will be quite difficult for me to grab all the details that I need there and then. And it's nice that there's kind of just, it's normal to do that sort of thing. That way I can have something to look back to and a place to refer to.
I think that's so interesting, because actually I think these days when I kind of step out of it, so to put it into context for everyone listening, I spent quite a large period of my career being a designer myself, and I find it really fascinating actually the more sort of I mean, with working with BDG in particular, the sort of human-centric side of design, and the fact that there's so much strategy in terms of the design of an office space that often people don't necessarily think has happened when they walk in a space. There's been a mass amount of analysis of people and of how people use spaces and how people work and interact together. And I think that for me, that's a really fascinating answer, because I don't know, it's just a different way of everyone working, and as sort of someone from a generation where they've got so many options available to them and a certain level of expectation, I love your kind of mix of answers there, in that you have that kind of expectation of a space, but actually the sort of flexibility. I mean, everything you've said there has been hugely positive, which I really love. I love people with a nice sort of silver lining aspect to kind of how they work and the way in which they engage with their space as well, which I guess kind of leads me on to introducing Bobbie into the conversation, of which I actually found, as we had a bit of a conversation in advance, and I'd love to kind of continue this as the sort of line of questioning. But so Bobbie was obviously talking about her career so far and kind of where she's at, and I loved the conversation that we had about the fact that your career is in a way and almost an embodiment of self. It's what you're passionate about, and I'd love to kind of talk a little bit more about how you initially actually aligned with your career and why you went into the industry that you're kind of looking to get into, as sort of a first line of questioning.
With it tying with like your career tying to itself, I think I can really resonate with you, Amber, in terms of dyslexia, because when I was younger, and I mean, I always had a flair for like creativity and art because it always interested me, and it was also something that really clicked because other things didn't, such as like, you know, reading and writing, and those things just I really struggled with. So I had to find other ways of communicating, and that was through, you know, a design and arts way of communicating, and like telling stories, but in a different way, that might, you know, in less of an educational way in terms of like, you know, essays and all those sort of things. So I tried to show my strengths in other places. And so that took me to fine art, which is quite expressive and you know, reflects a lot of the society, but then that kind of led me to, you know, art is also interpreted in so many different ways, and so, you know, you can almost be misunderstood, but that's free will almost of like somebody interpreting something different. So that's what led me to design again, like further honing in, as like my career following me along my life since I was young, and design really clicked with me because it was creating different elements together to help something be communicated across to an audience, and that it's clear and cohesive and there's a level of understanding across all boards, and so that has sprung me to where I am today, throughout my life. And you know, I'm still and in this sort of career that I'm taking on now, I'm still trying to find more ways to communicate with people in this sphere of graphic design and communication design. And I think that's what really led me to information design and creative strategy, because it was taking all these complicated elements and making it clear for everyone, and that's all I've ever wanted my whole life.
Everyone wants clarity.
Someone to be like, here you go, here's something really well presented and you can understand it and it's all good, and it's got icons, so you know you don't have to read everything, you know.
I mean, so, you are great. I mean,
I'm basically wishing I'm basically being the person that I wish I had when I was little. So do
you think having that level of like clarity within, I mean, essentially what you're producing for people is you're understanding not a space, but you're understanding a brand or an entity. I would love to get your insights into how you feel workplace is, in terms of you walk into a space and someone has obviously designed that for you because they've thought outside the box and tried to almost make a space that's totally usable for every type of person and every type of working based on that particular brand. And I would love to kind of get your thoughts, because you're someone who's analysing something and putting it together in a clear way, how you feel about office design, because although it's not necessarily what you do as a career, you could almost sort of translate your skills to something like that. And I'd love to get your insight as to what it's like to work in a place.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I think of when I'm designing a brand, is that I think I said this to you before in our last meeting, was like treating a brand almost like a person, like you get to know that person, and that person holds a space, and and if it's a brand, that brand or that identity travels with it wherever it goes. So that, if that slots into a workplace, it really has to empathize with the brand itself. It has to have empathy, so it has to reflect that of itself. And when it goes into a space, those elements apply again and again and again. And with, in terms of like equity and stuff like that, a brand doesn't almost have to attract to its customers, but also has to attract people who want to work there as well. So it is about the customers, and it's about attracting that community that you want to build around the brand, but it's also, you're trying to attract that community that you want people to grow the brand with. So that falls into its space. And when there's a disconnect between the actual, like, I call it the anatomy of a brand, the anatomy of it, when you and if that anatomy doesn't really connect in the inside as it shows on the outside, like the inside being the workplace and the workspace, and it not connecting to the outside, that's when there's friction there. And so if you have a brand, or if you have a company, you got to think of the inside out almost, because it's just as important. So if I was to when I step into a workplace or a workspace, I expect it to reflect its values and what it shows to its customers, and also to show to me as well a part of its growth, part of its body.
I think that's a really fascinating point, because I think that if you sort of look back historically, within an office you'll have the branding everywhere, and that will tell you who the brand is of who's in the space. However, I feel personally like these days you could walk into a space and you don't even have the brand on the wall, you don't have the logos on the wall, but it almost, like you were saying, is an embodiment of the type of brand or company that they are, and the way in which they work is almost a continuation and a reflection of the kind of company that they are, which I think is quite a fascinating way of you looking at it as someone who's more of like a brand expert. And I think also one of the other questions that I really would love to know is whether or not, I mean, it's sort of slightly going off kilt a bit, but I think within the same realm, I would love to know whether or not, because you study something incredibly creative and quite fluid, whether or not actually by having so many different things that you were looking at throughout your university career, whether or not that set you up to know what it was like to actually work, or whether or not actually to a certain extent having all of those things that you were testing and learning about didn't actually translate and allow you to, when you've got so much capabilities of testing lots of different things, whether or not then you step into the workplace, which maybe is more rigid because the clients that you have are much more reliant on deadlines and things like that. I would love to know your opinion.
Yeah, they in university have such a creative freedom, and it's amazing because you can really like hone in on not only what you enjoy but what you're really interested in. And you may be interested in something but you may not be good at it at the start, so it's great to I think you also have to humble yourself as well when you're in that environment, and it's really great to be able to explore that and mess up, and because you're not on anyone else's time, and if you make mistakes it's only going to affect you, it's not going to affect anything else apart from your like obviously grades and things like that, but when you're in a creative environment, grades don't really fall into place as much as they might do in a more academic subject. But it did give me that kind of independence where, like, if I want to learn how to do something and if I want to be able to achieve something, I've got to do that. There's people who may be able to like point me in the right direction a little bit, but it's me who's got to make that happen. And I think that's really, really good because it makes you a really good self-starter and get goer, but there is the other side of the coin where, you know, you've got clients who have a specific vision that they want, and you know, you can sort of see in your head as a creative how that might not work out as well as they think it will. But you still must, like, you know, you can point them towards that and, you know, nudge them a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's giving them what they want and what they need, not
exactly.
what necessarily what, you know, what you think is going to be amazing, because, you know, people don't always see the same thing. And, you know, that's why I try to be really like empathetic with my design, you know, really understand them as well as their company and how they think and how they want their company to look, which can kind of cross create problems along the way. So, you know, that's something that I've actually learned on the job, more than I would have in university, because you don't have that. I mean, you go in for a crit and, you know, you get feedback, and sometimes it's not that great, but then you think about it, but then it's like that creative freedom. But when you have time restrictions, also you have, you know, how much money can they afford of your time as well, you know, all of those things start to like come down on you a little bit, and you feel the pressure a little bit more than you would in university. So they did prepare me in terms of making me really resilient, but they also didn't prepare me in terms of restrictions. But you don't want to do that at university, because that doesn't bring in students of like, you must do this, this and this, you know, it doesn't bring in creative people. They'll be like, no, I'm good, I'm gonna go to, you know. So
I think that's the best thing about being at university, is the ability to sort of test the waters without sort of the budgets. And I mean, I studied architecture, and for me, if I'd been able to sort of test the waters with all the designs that I'd put out there, I think I would have wasted a hell of a lot of money. But
yeah, exactly.
I was actually going to introduce Freya into the conversation as well. And again, to Amber and to Bobbie, if you feel like you have points to make throughout the conversation, then feel free, because it's very sort of casual and fluid conversation. But sort of moving on in a way and on the same topic with Freya, what I loved actually about when we've had conversations previously is, obviously you're in new business development at the moment, and you know, actually when I started speaking with you, I got the impression that you had always wanted to be doing that particular role, and that had been your direction the whole way through. And actually what I found truly fascinating was that you originally studied chemistry, and I really would love to know, as an initial question for you, whether or not the realities of work and going into the chemistry lab to sort of start with at the beginning of your career made you think, actually, that's not for me at all. And I think that, kind of moving on from what Bobbie was saying about whether or not universities actually sort of set you up in the right way and make you experience and understand what a career is truly going to be like. So I'd love you to talk a bit about yourself and tell me about your thoughts for that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I didn't think I'd end up in sales. Obviously, I did a degree in chemistry, but although we have started a partnership with a laboratory fit out company, so fast, but maybe not. But yeah, I think definitely university sort of preps you for sort of working in an office, especially working in a lab. I guess that's sort of an office for a scientist. But yeah, I think genuinely just the self motivation that you have to have at university, and you know, the dedication. No one else is going to do the degree, and if you don't show up to lectures and don't show up to the lab, then you know, no one else is going to get it for you. So you have to do that yourself. And I think there's definitely been some sort of transferable skills from chemistry specifically. Don't know if anybody else can vouch for that, but when you're in a lab and you're doing an experiment and you're just staring at something to change color, or you know, you have to make one tiny change for a whole experiment to go right or to go wrong, and you have to repeat them just constantly. Yeah, I think that transfers into real life, especially with things like cold calling and cold emails. You know, something quite differently gets you a response, or you know, asking specific questions helps you understand what a client needs.
Well, that was one thing I was going to actually ask you as a sort of secondary as well, was that actually if you kind of step back and think, well, actually maybe university, you'd expected certain things from your chemistry degree, and you go in as a scientist and actually you go into that sort of workspace to a certain extent, and it just doesn't sort of tie in with your, I mean, it's kind of like the conversation I was having with Amber and with Bobbie about the fact that these days, particularly with Generation Z, your career is an embodiment of self to a certain extent. It's you live it. It's not that balance that isn't really there in the same way anymore, that people shut off at a certain time. And I think that when we were talking before, almost the fact that you studied a science degree, those skills I would love to know, like you were saying a moment ago, are to a certain extent transferable. I mean, maybe you're not going to be mixing chemicals in BW, you never know. But you, for example, understanding and being able to take the time and understanding process is all of those things. And I'd love to know a bit more about kind of your career right now, and whether or not you feel like it's a sort of fluid path as well, and whether or not the workplace allows you to be fluid, develop and really grow as a person as well as within your career.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've been for 2 years, and yeah, definitely I feel like I've changed as a person. Same throughout my degree. You guys probably say the same, but yeah, sort of that motivation, that drive, you sort of realize what you're succeeding, I guess. Although I say that, but I didn't carry on with chemistry. But in my third year, I did sort of notice that you know, in a lab you'll sort of have your headphones in and you're working on your own specific project, and that's that sort of made me realize that maybe I wanted to you know, a career that was a bit more meeting people, talking to people. So I guess, yeah, you sort of just notice things whilst you're doing these certain careers, and sort of figure out what you want. And yeah, at BW specifically, my boss is great with sort of figuring out what you like and how you can progress in that. So
and do you think that the actual like space that you're working in, particularly in new business, and for example, actually, if you sort of step back and you're saying that you do lots of calls, but then actually you do more meetings with people, and I think that personally these days the offices are designed for so many different types of people and so many different types of working settings. Do you think that sometimes that sort of vast array almost means that there's sort of too much of an option? And that's kind of like a question really to Amber and also to Bobbie, that, you know, for example, particularly with Amber, you were sort of talking about like the dyslexia side, or even just, I don't know, the communication side of things. When you're on a call, you kind of don't know where to go, or I'd love to kind of get everyone's opinion really on whether or not the options almost allow your career to flourish, or whether or not it becomes quite a difficult thing to know where to go.
yeah, I mean, in the specific design of the office, I wouldn't say too much if that's what you mean, sort of like breakout spaces and
yeah, I mean, to be honest, in general, just sort of like you walk into a space and often, you know, it's hugely flexible and exciting, there's loads of options, but actually sometimes you almost don't know where to sit, you don't know where to go or where you're meant to belong. Or, and I'd love to know whether, as a new person arriving into an office space for the first time in your career, you know, whether or not that's quite a daunting thing.
yeah, I maybe wouldn't agree. Oh, the lights come back on. I think maybe Gen Z, like this generation, are the generation that is going to pick sort of that company that is flexible space and it's sort of inclusive space, so it has all these, you know, breakout spaces and like mothering rooms, prayer rooms, things like that, and well-being rooms. I mean, we are sort of generation anxiety, aren't we? So but yeah, have been sort of breakout spaces, so like places to yeah, places to sort of, you know, make a phone call that's not work related and things like that. I think this will be the generation that picks sort of well-being, inclusivity, things like that over, you know, a company that has lovely meeting rooms and, you know, lovely tea point, but and a larger salary. But I think this is the generation that is gonna, you know, pick those perks of the company over different ones.
I think that's a really fascinating point actually regarding sort of well-being and that sort of aspect, because, you know, these days people are taking, I mean, as a designer myself, you know, when you're designing a space, you're imagining the types of people that are going to be using it and actually why they'd want to sit in certain spaces. And I think it's fascinating that sometimes you'll have a lovely armchair in the corner, and it'll be a really nice sort of space, but actually it's completely open and people don't feel comfortable to go and sit in there. And I think that the strategy behind it is quite a fascinating one, in terms of the way in which different types of people, obviously you're all sort of within the creative field, but it's vastly interesting to me how the generations are developing, and actually how workspaces almost need to continue being fluid and movable and flexible, not only with the furniture, but also within the way in which people utilize the spaces with the types of events that are going on, if they're doing talks, or just the sort of offer that a lot of companies have for their staff.
Yeah, definitely. I think we've sort of seen like a huge growth in sort of BREEAM and WELL certifications, which is sort of based on the environment and how you sort of use your space. Yeah, I think those sort of aspects, definitely environment, Gen Z is going to be on that. They're going to want to work in a LEED platinum office always. But yeah, I think definitely those sort of things, yeah, they're going to shine through. I really do think.
I'd love to kind of bring it back around to Amber as well, because obviously we haven't spoken to you for quite some time in the conversation, but this is where I really wanted to make it more of like a casual kind of conversation for the final sort of like 5 or 10 minutes, and almost just a bit of a discussion really about your experiences and whether or not you see and kind of how the development of the office needs to be to cater for your career in the next, you know, these spaces are being constantly developed and you're at the early stages of your careers. I'd love to ask each and every one of you what you would love to see from an office that you're working in the next 5 or 10 years, you know, even if it's completely out there, or, you know, just something really small.
Yeah, no, I think that like part of our job is sometimes just being stand-ins for things like photo shoots and stuff, and so we get to see quite a large variety of different office spaces. And I think with the experience of doing both, obviously working from home and working in the office, I realized that I quite like the idea of having different rooms for different roles. So like if I'm doing writing, I do like to sit in silence and like not get distracted by like music and things like that. But if I'm working on, because I do a bit of the digital stuff where I'm making a lot of the social media posts for clients and stuff, and if I'm doing something like that, I like having people around to like bounce the ideas off and make like get opinions of and things like that. And they're sort of things that you can't obviously do from home as well. And like today, I went out on just a stroll around Clerkenwell where we're based, because it's the Clerkenwell I think it's unlocked as a mini Clerkenwell Design Week and all that lot. But it was nice just to have that opportunity to go and explore all different showrooms and things like that. And I think location is another big factor, because where I live, I'm by the coast and there's nothing like that around me. But when I'm in the city, like I have the opportunities where I can go anywhere and find something interesting, or find something that I can take back into work and talk about at work. I think location is another big thing that sometimes gets forgotten, because everyone wants to kind of get out of the city. But the pros of the city is that, especially in my job, is there's things all the time to look at and things all the time that can spark conversations with people. And it's how you're going to meet.
Yeah. I was going to say, actually, I love that you've kind of moved on to that, because we've actually got a question that's just come in, because as we're the London Society, just basically just seeing whether or not all of the panelists are compelled to be in London. And that was quite interesting, because you were just sort of saying there that there's that drive to actually be here and be present within the city, because there's a hub and a buzz and a lot of things going on. But I'm actually going to ask each and every one of you the same question, but would you ever consider a different city, or even working outside of the city and just traveling in? Is that something in terms of the sort of home work-life balance between being in a sort of zen place to then being in a city?
I think I originally, when I started my placement, I lived just outside the city, so only about 20 minutes into work, and now I'm quite a few hours away. And I think whether or not I'd always stay in London, I don't know, but I do believe that I am a person that does thrive in cities. I like having the ability to go for a walk and not get bored. I get quite bored walking around where I live because it is a lot of countryside, and so I like the idea of being really close to friends and always having things to do, even just outside of work, but also having the ability to, after work, go out with your colleagues and go out with people and not worry so much about, oh my God, tonight.
Bobbie, I'd love to know your opinion on that as well. Just to like bring you back in. And also Freya, obviously, as well.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in the countryside, so I'm like in the middle of nowhere. So, being in London, it was that when I first came to live in London, when I started university, it was incredible because of, like you said, the atmosphere that you get and that kind of non-stop. Like, people have quite a drive. You can see it, you know, in the way they walk, and you know, you know, there's the London Walk, which is like 100 miles an hour down the street, and just you don't move for anyone. But
true. I've managed to kind of get that now.
Yeah, it's hard. Well, it's a lot changed now, but the community that you kind of have in London, like one thing I loved, which I saw when I used to walk back from university, was outside the pubs, like in the after work, you see all these people wearing like business suits and all these, I don't know, even if they weren't wearing suits, they just, you know, they had their look about them that they've just finished a hard day at work, but they were with their colleagues still and socializing. And it's like, you know, bringing that office space out, but you know, but carrying it out, and it was more of a social kind of network, which was actually really amazing to see, because, you know, when I grew up in the countryside, it was like, you know, farmers outside the pub a little bit drunk and young people, and you know, so it was something of like, even the social part of this city still has that work ethic in driven into it, which you know, which really made me inspired to, you know, get up and work hard and, you know, start.
You know, I'd love to know that about Freya as well, because obviously you're in new business and you're kind of bringing people in and engaging people about BW, and actually that sort of cultural side and the aspect of that side of your job seems to me like a real passion for you, and something that you love about your role that maybe you didn't get from the chemistry laboratory experience. I'd love you to give your opinion on the same topic.
Yeah, definitely within sort of meeting people, I think. I mean, we mainly work in London and surrounding areas, so in regards to sort of meeting people and bringing in new business, yeah, sort of taking them out in London is always, there's nothing quite like it, you know, the restaurants in London. I
mean, they're great.
Yeah, it's too many. But yeah, sort of meeting them, they're all sort of in London. I think, especially in the job role I am, you know, fitting out office space. The office space in London is incredible. Obviously the towers are amazing, and I graduated from Brighton University, and there's not much like that over there. So yeah, sort of London just initially attracted me for job opportunities and work, and then when I landed this job role there, yeah, London seems like the place to stay.
You know what, I'm just going to mention just to everyone listening that please feel free, now I was going to sort of open it up to questions from the audience, and just to kind of get a bit of an idea of what it is that you'd love to know about Generation Z. But whilst we kind of do that, and if there's any additional kind of questions that come through, I was going to kind of continue the same vein in terms of the level of conversation, because I think that for me personally, just to put into context, I actually moved out of London during lockdown, and I actually currently am looking about moving back in again. And I think for me personally, in answer to the question that came through, I think there's just nothing like London as a city, cities in general, but that sort of thing of bringing people together. And I think that if you then put that to the workplace, I think that personally there's nothing like being in an office space of people who all sort of studied similar things, and they're all, if you sort of take a step back, they're all passionate about the same subject, and that's how they've ended up getting there, no matter whether they've studied chemistry and ended up in new business development, or if they've studied branding, or, you know, you find such a wealth of people from different backgrounds, but they are all there kind of for the same reason. And I just don't think personally that there's anything that kind of compares to that. I don't know whether anyone has any opinions around that sort of that concept, but I know it's always quite difficult to know whether someone's going to jump in, but feel free to kind of if you have any ideas on that.
Yeah, no, I think people will definitely want to keep coming into London. People coming in from outside London, I think the trains might have to give a bit more for people to convince people to sort of get on that packed train at 6:30 p.m. at Euston Station when it's crowded.
Yeah,
definitely. I think that people still, of course, want to come into London. Always, I think.
Have you found that so from, I guess, an insight from BW and the sort of new business side of it, whether or not you found that there's been any changes in the way that the office has been designed within even the last couple of years during the COVID period, and the way in which people are now much more fluid in the way that they work, and whether or not you think that that's going to continue in that direction, particularly with sort of Generation Z in mind?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has just fast forward sort of office trends. I think we're definitely seeing more flexibility, a lot of open plan offices where like a lot more board members sit on the same level as all the other employees, a lot more breakout space, obviously, and that's definitely going to continue, I can imagine. Tech was always amped up a bit, especially pre-pandemic, but even more so now. Even people who had the best tech pre-pandemic, they're trying to get new AV. So definitely there's lots of trends. I think environmental has really sped up. A lot of our clients now have net carbon zero targets, and to achieve that in a business, your office space also has to have that same target. So a lot of trends from landlords, we're seeing them implement things in their building to achieve net carbon zero.
And I think it's an embodiment of the values that people have these days. I think particularly with COVID, I don't know about you or Bobbie or Amber, but personally I've sat back and sort of thought about just things like the environment or well-being, or just all of those things that you don't tend to kind of have a moment to think about in terms of not necessarily yourself, but I think that actually the staff members are sort of starting to expect that type of thing these days as being just a given, that the company that they work for has actually thought about maybe where the furniture has come from, or the materials that's been used, or cladding on the walls, and actually the irrigation systems, and going into sort of more of the architectural side. And I guess then sort of bringing in Bobbie again, I'd love to kind of know the whole thing. We were just talking a moment ago about the fact that your career is essentially like an embodiment of your values and you as a person. And I'd love to kind of get from like a branding perspective whether or not you think that brands are starting to showcase their values a lot more within the way that the way that you're kind of developing brands, because it's interesting how each one of those things kind of layers together within the workplace design sphere.
Yeah, responsibility is with the capital R is quite important, and brands take on a lot more responsibility in terms of health in every sense of the word, like of their employees, but of their space, of the environment, and they recognize that that's what people want, and that's what, not just what they want but also what they need, and taking responsibility of the materials that you have in the office, the kind of colors as well that you have, and that
I find that fascinating, how it makes people feel.
yeah, definitely. And also just generally, like, opening up more green spaces within an office, like, putting up those green walls and stuff, and bringing more of the outside in to make it feel not so enclosed as like you're in a box. And that's why open plan is quite nice, because you get a sense of community in there, and you can see everyone working around you, which is nice. It puts everyone on the same kind of playing field, where the person who, like you said, when you said Freya, you said like the board members are like even like working on there, because everyone's putting in that kind of same effort and that responsibility. So like in the workplace, I think that really reflects, especially when it comes to a brand, it's just making sure that everyone does their part, like within like a brand design, every element has its place, has its responsibility, has its, and then that carries into the workplace and the office as well. You can, and that's what I would definitely expect when I walk into a place of work, you know, into an office space. I expect there to be, you know, elements that play and reflect what the company is. And
I think also, sorry, go ahead.
No, carry on.
No, I was going to say, this is where I thought actually, Amber, I was going to say actually tying into those sort of levels, because obviously Bobbie's talking about the aspects of like the brand and how it's kind of represented. Then within the sort of, I mean, I feel like this ties in really nicely as like a nice way to kind of finish, is actually talking about the way that then when you're in PR, how you get that out there and that message about those brands and about that company that's actually just invested a huge amount of money into their space. I'd love to kind of know whether or not there's been changing ways in which you get that message across to the world through PR and through your platform.
I think it's quite lucky in that the press are just as interested, especially with there being tons of articles all the time about whether or not being in the office is going to be the future. I think anything to do with the pros of being in the office, they're going to pick up attraction with outlets. And I think that's really lucky because it does make sure that our clients do get their voices heard and they are in the limelight for the good things that they are doing. I think we've also seen a shift in awards as well. A lot of the awards have now got categories dedicated to sustainability, and in part of the answering the questions, they're asking how were these products manufactured and where have they come from. And I think that's also changing it because it's making companies aware that everyone is analysing them for these sort of factors. And if anything, it's kind of pushing them into that direction of whether or not they want to do it for themselves and their staff, they also want to do it for their reputation, to make people, like we were saying earlier, want to work for a company like them, knowing that they're about these aspects. And I think that's a really good way of doing it. And social media hasn't changed. People are on it even more so now than they probably were pre-pandemic, because we've all just been
online.
I think we're seeing a lot more companies posting about their workspaces and the things that they're doing internally as well, not just posting project photos of things that they've done elsewhere, but also turning the camera on themselves and highlighting their own steps that they're making as well.
Oh, I think this is like a hugely, honestly, I find this subject so fascinating, and I feel like it's a shame that we're kind of nearing on the end, but I kind of wanted to finish off by maybe just getting from each and every one of you just a little summary about what you would kind of expect in the future. And it seems like all of you, from what I can gather, really want businesses and the workplace that you're in to actually showcase their culture and their values. And that seems like, even though you're kind of from different sectors, it seems like that's kind of what is coming through to me. And I'd love to know whether or not I'm right in my summary or not.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. I think I would love to see sort of an office that has that work-life balance, you know, somewhere that you can go and work really hard for 2 hours, do some hard hits on the phone calls, and then, you know, another hour where you're working with someone else on sort of informal sofas, having a chat as well, sort of coming up with new ideas. And then, yeah, sort of maybe like a private phone booth where, you know, you can go have an argument with your mum or something, just more that work-life balance. Yeah, definitely. I think companies, I think they're going to become way more inclusive with their space. And I think you'll end up getting more Gen Zs wanting to work for that company over sort of another company that, you know, is using their office space much differently.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree, and I appreciate the fact that you agree with my summary, because sometimes I can get it totally wrong. But I just kind of want to sort of retract back a little bit, because I can't quite believe the time is almost up, because genuinely, so I've met I've met Amber in person, but I've never actually met Freya or Bobbie, and I genuinely feel as though you know, when you kind of get to know people really well over the bit of time that we've kind of been talking. But I firstly want to just say thank you to each and every one of you for being so open about your experiences of your career so far. And I know that, you know, talking about yourself is actually very difficult, and your experiences. So that, firstly, thank you very much. And also giving us a really great insight into your experiences in the workplace as well. And I know for an absolute fact that at some point we'll go for a drink somewhere, but I really wanted to wish you all well in your careers, because I really feel like in like 5 years or so you'll be running things. So it was really lovely to have you all part of it. Kind of also like to say a massive thank you for all of the attendees for listening in and being part of the conversation, and obviously for the question that we had in there as well. And please feel free to like and share. I think this is recorded, so you can listen to it back via the London Society website. I am Rachel. I'd like to just allow you just to say your goodbyes, but so we'll go with Amber first, just to do your little wave.
Thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, cheers everyone. Thank you.
Thanks so much.